The biggest card in UFC history is coming up this weekend, and today we're going to take a look at the card from top to bottom and give our thoughts on each matchup without giving a prediction. Those will come later in the week. Stick around to see my thoughts on the UFC 300 card. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Okay, so the very first fight of the night that we have here is Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. This is a very interesting matchup because you have the former 125-pound champ against the former 135-pound champ in a fight that definitely would not be the first fight of the night on any other card. I mentioned last week that the UFC was being strategic about their card structuring and putting some of the weaker fights on this card in between very, very fan-desired fights so that people will actually stick around and not come around to the card 4 fights in. Like if they were to put Andrade and Marina Rodriguez and Holm Kayla Harrison as the first 2 fights of the night, people would most likely just skip them. With this being the biggest card that the UFC has ever put on, they definitely want people watching from start to finish. This fight between Figueiredo and Garbrandt has huge stakes because Cody Garbrandt is looking to get himself back into the bantamweight rankings after dipping his toes in the water at flyweight. And if he can get this done, he's probably 1 win away from challenging for a title. So for Cody Garbrandt, this is where we find out if he has still got it. He's looked washed for quite some time now, and if he can pull off a win here, it'll put him right back in the mix of things at 135, in the top 10 with a win against a former champ. Now, for Figueiredo, he beat Rob Font to get into the bantamweight rankings after moving up from flyweight. He was cutting a ton of weight to make 125. I think I saw that he was cutting from somewhere around 160. Going down to 125 from 160 is an insane portion of your body weight. And I mean, I'm glad that he moved up. I wish more guys would move up in weight or cut less weight. And go and watch my old video about weight cutting called One of the Biggest Problems Facing UFC Fighters if you want to hear my thoughts on the weight cutting problem. Both of these guys have been champs before, and for both of these guys, it looks like it's their last hope to get towards another title in their career. Deiveson Figueiredo has much more light at the end of the tunnel in terms of his career. Cody Garbrandt, I think he's 1 knockout loss from being done or ending up in BKFC. This is a huge fight with huge stakes for both of these guys' careers. 2 former champs opening up the night. The matchup is very interesting. I'm fairly certain that a lot of it's going to be on the feet. Both of these guys have heavy hands, and I think that somebody's going to go to sleep in this fight. The second fight of the night is Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. And this is a little bit of an OG's fight because both of these guys have been around for over 10 years in the UFC. And Jim Miller is the only fighter ever to compete on UFC 100, 200, and now 300. If Jim Miller can win this fight, he'll find himself in the lightweight rankings in his 40s, I think, which is pretty crazy to think about considering the age of both of these guys and the mileage that both of these guys have in their careers, that they're both competing still near the top of the food chain in probably the UFC's hardest weight class. 155 is probably the hardest weight class or second hardest weight class behind 135. You see how impressive these guys' career longevity has been with Bobby Green knocking out Grant Dawson in under a minute, who was 19-1 and was supposed to be this big prospect. This is a big fight, and I'll get my predictions out during fight week, but it'd be cool to see one of these guys put together a win streak and get towards the top of the food chain. I don't think that either of them are going to be title contenders ever again. We saw Bobby Green get viciously KO'd by Jalin Turner. I think that that's what would happen to him against most of the top guys. But for Jim Miller, he finds a way to survive. He doesn't take too many KO-worthy shots. And if he can get matched up the right way, he could maybe get into the top 10 and have more main events, make some more money before the end of his career. So this is a big legends fight right here. Not, GOAT type of legends, but guys that have been around for a long time and have a lot of respect from fight fans. Now, moving up the card from there, we have Jéssica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. Personally, this fight doesn't have many stakes to me. This is them giving Jéssica Andrade a matchup for this card as one of those filler slots, and so that they can say they have a former champion on the card, because I think there's 11 on the card as a whole. But there's no real stakes to this fight. It's a top 10 strawweight matchup, but strawweight is, there's a title fight on this card. Maybe that's a contingency fight where if somebody from the main event, co-main event pulls out, that Jéssica Andrade could step in for a title shot on short notice. It's probably what they were aiming for here, but there really isn't much stakes with this fight other than it being a former champion on the card. But there's not really any like big stakes or big hype towards that card or towards that fight on this card. And then moving up the card from there, wrapping up the early prelims, you have Jalin Turner versus Money Moicano. This is a really intriguing matchup for me. Jalin Turner is a gigantic lightweight, and Renato Moicano has been hot and cold at times. He's performed very well, but he's also been KO'd by some of the top of the food chain guys like Fiziev. And he's also lost to RDA. That was on short notice, so I don't really hold that one against him so much. But this one is a matchup of two exciting up-and-comers. I wouldn't call them prospects because they're more established, but up-and-coming guys, established ranking guys that could make a push towards the top 10. Jalin Turner has fought guys in the top 10 and around that top 10, like Dan Hooker, and he lost by split decision. Moicano has also, where he lost by vicious KO to Rafael Fiziev. But this is a fun fight. This is one that the fans care about a lot. Both of these guys have good fan bases. Renato Moicano has grown a huge fan base through his YouTube channel and through his post-fight speeches. This is one I'm really excited about. Obviously, Jalin Turner's length and size is a bitch to deal with at lightweight, but I think that Renato Moicano stands a good chance in this fight. Moving up the card from there, we have Sodiq Yussuf fighting the fan favorite Diego Lopes, the prospect that gave Movsar a run for his money in a very competitive loss that he had in his UFC debut on short notice. He's finally getting a full camp to fight a ranked opponent. And he beat, I think, Pat Sabatini in New York in November. And now he's getting a ranked opponent with a full camp. He's not going short notice against Movsar. This is not as big of a fight as Jalin Turner and Renato Moicano, but I think that this is what the UFC is trying to do with 300, is build up these potential stars. That's why Bo Nickal's on the main card. That's why Kayla Harrison's on the card. That's why Diego Lopes is on the card. This is a chance for him to have a coming out party and get into the featherweight rankings against a very reputable opponent in Sodiq Yussuf. And if he can pull this off, especially with some style points, his star is only going to get bigger. And they'll always reference him having a big win on the biggest card of all time. That's why they want guys like him and Bo Nickal on this card. So that's a really fun fight. And I'll put my prediction out for it during the fight week, but this is a very, very fun fight that should be a lot of fun to watch. Moving up from there, you have Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison, and you have former champion again, Holly Holm, kind of being fed to the wolves here, which is Kayla Harrison, who I have no idea how she's supposed to make 135 pounds. She's probably taking Ozempic. She's competed at 155 before. I believe she competed in the high 160s when she was doing judo in the Olympics. As people get older, we get heavier, we get bigger. Not many people shrink with time. And she is 34 or 5 now, and she's competing 20 pounds below her normal weight class. If Amanda Nunes would have stuck around, they probably would have had her face Amanda Nunes at 145. But she's in the UFC now, and it's at 135 pounds. I'm excited for this one. If she makes weight and she's not too drained, she'll probably ragdoll Holly Holm. But I am very excited for that fight, even though it is one of the weaker fights on the card. Moving up from there, we have former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling making his debut at 145 pounds against longtime featherweight contender Calvin Kattar, who's coming off of an extended layoff. I believe he's had multiple surgeries since the last time that he fought. This is going to be a fun fight. We're going to see if Aljo can compete with bigger guys at 145. I don't think he'll have too much of a problem. I actually think he's going to look great, given that he was a huge bantamweight and he was cutting a lot of weight. I think that he'll look a lot better not cutting so much weight. I don't think the size is going to be a problem. I think that it'll be better for his chin as well. He's not fighting Sean O'Malley, who hits like a truck for that weight class. He's cutting less weight, and he's fighting Calvin Kattar, who's not known for having knockout power. Calvin Kattar looks to bounce back. If he can beat a former champion, who knows what that means for him at 145 moving forward. Maybe he'll get a top 5 matchup from there. But fun fight, former champion. And that's good matchmaking. Moving up from there, the final prelim of UFC 300, which should be opening the main card, in my opinion, is Jiří Procházka versus Aleksandar Rakić. Now, I understand this is the biggest card that they've ever put on, but number 2 versus number 3 at light heavyweight fighting on the prelims is insane. Yuri's looking to bounce back from his TKO loss to Alex Pereira in November at Madison Square Garden, and Rakić is looking to bounce back from blowing out his knee against Jan Blachowicz. So we haven't seen him since 2022, I believe. I believe that this, the same way that I think that Andrade is kind of that contingency fighter for the co-main event, I think that Jiří is the contingency fighter for the main event. I think that Jiří would fill in the main event if Alex Pereira or Jamahal Hill was to miss weight or get injured right before the card. And, you know, they needed an emergency fill-in because they had a hard enough time putting this card together and getting a reputable main card and main event. And I don't think that the UFC wants to run the risk of losing 1 or 2 title fights due to weight misses or injuries. I think this is a very interesting matchup. Aleksandar Rakić is very talented on the feet. This is mostly going to happen on the feet. Jiří gets hit a lot. We'll see if his chin can hold up. We'll see how Aleksandar Rakić can hold up. This is going to be a firework fight. And, you know, the top of 205 is a little bit booked up right now because you have Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira. And then the winner of that fight is almost for sure going to be fighting Magomed Ankalaev. So the winner of this fight would probably be next in line after Magomed Ankalaev for a title shot. But still, big stakes. It's probably a title eliminator, not necessarily a number 1 contenders fight, but still a very exciting fight for this card. And it's astonishing to me that it's on the prelims. Moving up from there, we have the main card, opening the main card. Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. I get it. They're trying to build Bo Nickal as a star. Some of you guys in my comments are defending Bo Nickal's card position, which I don't agree with at all. He should be opening the prelims, in my opinion. You know, he does have some name value, but putting him up against somebody like Cody Brundage, who's very, very average, middle of the pack, maybe even below average, given the way he's performed in the past. I can't say that this makes sense. I wish they would have given Bo Nickal a ranked opponent, maybe a Marvin Vettori. I know that would be a huge step up. Maybe they give him somebody that would test his wrestling and be ranked, maybe a Anthony Hernandez. That's a good matchup. Yeah, this fight should have been against Anthony Hernandez, somebody from Jack Hermanson, Anthony Hernandez, or Chris Curtis. I know Chris Curtis is filling in on, or just filled in on short notice against Brendan Allen. And then Hernandez is booked, just got booked against Dolidze for 302. And Hamzat's booked against Whitaker. And then Paul Craig and Caio Borralho are fighting at 301. I really think that Bo Nickal, if he's going to be on the main card of such a big event, he should fight somebody like Jack Hermanson or Anthony Hernandez that would actually test his wrestling and be a ranked opponent that would justify this card placement. But Cody Brundage is going to get smoked, most likely. Minus 1350 favorite. Cody Brundage is a plus 950 underdog. It's not a competitive fight from an odds standpoint, and I wish they would have given Bo Nickal a tougher matchup if he was going to be on the main card, or put him on the prelims if it was going to be against somebody like Cody Brundage. Moving up from there, we have Probably the fight that I'm most excited for besides the main event is Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. I'm a huge Charles Oliveira fan, but I also have a ton of respect for Arman Tsarukyan and the fact that he took Islam Makhachev to a split decision in his very first UFC fight on short notice. I'd love to see him get a fight against Islam. Charles was not competitive in his fight against Islam when they fought, and he pulled out. I think that Charles would win this fight, and hopefully Dustin Poirier, if that rumored matchup takes place with Islam, that Dustin would get to be champion and Charles would potentially get to win this fight and fight Dustin, who he's already defended his belt against when he was champion at UFC 269. Now, I think that this is one of the most intriguing matchups. It's one of those things. Oliveira could get a first round sub. He could get a first round finish. He could get finished in the first round. But the winner of this fight's going to fight whoever's champ. If it's not against Islam, it's going to be against the winner of Dustin and Islam, I think is going to be the next lightweight title fight. Huge fight. I'd love to see Charles get a win here, but it is a very, very tough matchup. One of the biggest tests of his career. And for Arman Tsarukyan, definitely the biggest test of his career to this point. And a win over Charles Oliveira could get him a lot of notoriety and build his star power a lot going into a potential title fight, because he's been kind of that guy that's been lurking in the top 10 at lightweight, top 5 at lightweight, and just didn't have that big of a name. He hasn't fought really any big names. He fought Beneil Dariush, but that didn't build his name so much. He needs a big win against somebody like Charles Oliveira to become a serious contender that the fans take seriously. Obviously, his skills and his ranking justify a title shot, but from the business side of things, he's not there yet, and a win over Charles Oliveira would do that for him. From there, we have the BMF title fight. You have Justin Gaethje, the BMF champion, fighting against Max Holloway, who's moving up from 145 pounds, for real this time, with a full camp. It's not him taking the fight against Dustin Poirier on short notice. It's him actually bulking up the right way to fight with a full camp at 155. This fight is going to be fireworks. I hope it stays on the feet. I could see Justin Gaethje cracking Max's legendary chin. I could see Max Holloway stinging Justin Gaethje and putting it on him for like a standing TKO or a late round finish. But this fight being 5 rounds definitely plays in Max Holloway's favor. His gas tank's incredible. He's not a small featherweight. He's got a legendary chin. He's cutting 10 less pounds. So his chin should probably be even better. But Justin Gaethje cracks like no other lightweight. And so we'll see what happens. This is a huge matchup. I think that there's a little bit of a lightweight tournament going on at 300 where you have Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan, and you also have Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje. I think whoever has the most impressive win at 300 is going to get a title shot of those 4 guys. I think that my prediction right now is that Dustin Poirier and Islam Makhachev are going to fight in June at UFC 302 or at UFC 303, also in June at International Fight Week. And the winner of that fight will fight whoever has the most impressive win at UFC 300. Dana White said when he announced Oliveira Tsarukyan that was the number 1 contenders fight, but the UFC announces number 1 contenders fights all the time where guys don't get title shots. Khamzat versus Kamaru Usman on short notice was supposed to be a number 1 contenders fight, and now Khamzat's fighting Rob Whittaker. Usman's probably a middleweight that's going to have to fight somebody else like Strickland or somebody, but that wasn't a number 1 contenders fight, even though that's what they were promised. Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns was supposed to be a number 1 contenders fight. Bilal still has not gotten that title shot that he was promised, so we'll see. The co-main event, Yan Xiaonan versus Weili Zhang. This fight's going to be fireworks. Weili Zhang, very exciting. She has power for 115 pounds, which is really exciting. Yan Xiaonan is on a win streak. She KO'd Jéssica Andrade, I believe. And this is a China versus China women's matchup. They are going to get a ton of Chinese viewers. And so them putting this fight on this card is very strategic, and I appreciate the matchmaking as well. Both have outstanding records and are on very impressive runs lately. I lean towards Weili in this fight, but I'll get to my predictions later in the week. Very big fight at 115 pounds. China versus China, great matchmaking. From there, we have the main event. UFC 300, Pereira versus Hill. We have Alex Pereira against Jamahal Sweet Dreams Hill. Jamahal Hill coming back in a fairly quick timeline after tearing his Achilles in a charity basketball game during International Fight Week last year. And Alex Pereira making his third appearance at 205 pounds after beating Jiří Procházka to become champ. Now, if one of these guys misses weight, I think Yuri's going to fill in the main event. I don't think Rakić is going to get a title shot if one of these guys misses weight or gets hurt. I think it's Jiří. That's why he's on the card, in my opinion. And then I think that the winner of this fight is going to fight Magomed Ankalaev. If Pereira gets it done inside one without taking damage, he might fight 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later at UFC 301. But we'll see. It's really interesting because I think that Pereira is much better on the feet than Jamahal Hill, but he does take a lot of damage. He is very open to boxing combinations, and Jamahal Hill does have a great 1-2. He has KO'd a lot of guys. When I consider Jamahal Hill's run to a title being Johnny Walker, Thiago Santos, and Glover Teixeira, and then also compound that with coming off of this injury. When you combine that, or if you compare that to Alex Pereira beating Jan Blachowicz and then Jiří at 205 pounds, I think that Pereira had the tougher road to the belt. But with that said, Pereira did get KO'd by Izzy, who is not known for his knockout power. I could see Pereira getting caught, but I could also see him getting around 1 KO. I don't think this fight's going to be long. I think that Pereira versus Hill is going to be less than 2 rounds. And so there's my take. That's what I think of UFC 300. This is my series, A Closer Look, where we take a closer look at the big cards before they come without giving a prediction. We talk about the stakes and the styles. Leave me your thoughts down below. What fight are you most excited for on UFC 300? Who do you think is going to win the main event? And what's the sleeper matchup on the card for you? I want to hear your thoughts.